There is no way you're getting a Kanye West interview in 2024 without some crazy quotables. But I'm excited because for the first time in what feels like a long time, those quotables are related to music. It has nothing to do with like niche right-wing figures or religion or anything controversial outside of just some hot music takes. He sat down with Big Boy to have a conversation about vultures with Ty Dolla $ign by his side, and he said the following about his impact.
I invented every style of music of the past 20 years. I created the genre. I created Weeknd genre, Trav, Drake. You know, I'm going ahead and say With All Love, Future and Thug also, because the auto-tune album.
Oh man, I just want to start off by saying that I've been a huge Kanye fan for most of my life, and I'm so relieved that we're here talking about music. There's a lot of other stuff that he's decided to make a part of his journey, and honestly, I've kind of tuned out on Kanye because of that. Relatively speaking, at least. For the past 6 years or so, the narrative around Kanye's music has really not been about his music that much. It's always been about the antics, who he's dating, what he's talking about outside of the music. And I think a big part of that is that the music hasn't been interesting enough to be in the forefront compared to the antics. When he was storming the stage in protest of Taylor Swift, like he followed that up with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So after a while, we were just talking about the album. Every single project he's dropped since Life of Pablo, in my opinion, maybe with the exception of Kids See Ghosts, which is a collab album anyway, has been like, you know, there are nuggets of things that are great in every single one. Yay is low-key fascinating, but it's really short. And if your album is 7 tracks long, you know, they better all be bangers. And not the case. Jesus is King, I mean, the production, some of it is cool, you know, I guess. Donda, I feel like has some great standout tracks, but I think it suffers from the way that it was made. Like, I think if he had sat with Donda with the same kind of care that he went over the first 6-7 albums in his discography with, like, it would have sounded a lot different. Some of the songs like go on too long. There's just like weird, like not enough production changes in some of them for me. Like, you still get some mumble verses, which is really like my biggest pet peeve with Kanye is like the mumble verse and some of his newer stuff. Like it'll just take me right out of it. And Vultures, I actually think is probably his most complete project. And I really like some of the songs, but it's not completely immune from some of the issues that I just mentioned in the other albums for sure. But with that being said, like, that's not what we're here to talk about. This isn't about how I feel about his recent music. This is about his legacy. So let's take a look at those 2 sentences he gave us and let's break it down almost like word for word and see if this bold claim is true. But first, if you can throw a like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm almost at 2,000 subscribers, which is amazing. I haven't even been doing this for like half a year yet. I really appreciate you guys. If you want to see any of my videos early, all you have to do is go to my Instagram, follow me, join my broadcast channel. And in that broadcast channel, I post the videos 1 day early every week, no exceptions. I got a new video every Tuesday, so that means Mondays you'll see them in the broadcast channel. If you ever see a comment and you're like, yo, how did this guy comment that early? That's how. All right, back to the video. So with any quote that we find on the internet, we got to start here and examine the context to make sure it wasn't pulled out of context. And after watching the interview, it wasn't really out of context. He said that and he meant it, and I'm not surprised. I think the most effective way to start this is to look at each of those artists that he named and really take them case by case. Let's start with Drake. Drake is a yes, 100%. Kanye West is completely right that he influenced Drake. Drake would tell you that though. Remember, we're not talking about mob boss Drake or Caribbean Drake or British Drake, dance Drake. We're talking about that Drake that we saw in the second half of the 2000s during Kanye's initial run. All we have to do is look at the first few Drake projects and it's abundantly clear. Going back as far as the 2007 mixtape Comeback Season, Drake was rapping on the Barry Bonds beat. On So Far Gone, the classic mixtape that came after Comeback Season, the song Say What's Real is rapping on Kanye's Say You Will instrumental. On Drake's debut album Thank Me Later, Kanye produced 2 songs, Show Me a Good Time and Find Your Love. And Find Your Love especially seems to be cut right from that 808s and Heartbreak cloth that Kanye was on around that time. Look, the rest is history. These two have a very long and complex relationship. It's not really what this video is about. Either way, both of them will tell you that Kanye was a huge influence on Drake. The interesting thing though about Kanye's influence on Drake is Drake was being inspired by all aspects and all facets of Kanye's artistry. From the boom bappier stuff to the backpack rap, college kid swag to the R&B sing-songy, like ethereal, moody stuff that you got on 808s. Like, Kanye really laid the path for a guy like Drake to come in and become a superstar. It's why it's kind of funny that the two of them have problems now. It's a little bit like that Subway sandwich meme, like my brother in Christ, like you made this sandwich, you know, like how are you mad at it? Obviously, after a certain while, like Drake evolved and became his own artist. I mean, I think he always was his own artist, and I'm gonna talk more about like how having influences doesn't mean you're not your own artist a little bit later. But Drake has really become an artist that is kind of hard to recognize, not in a bad way, just like he's really changed his music a lot. And he gives a lot of credit to some other people, not just Kanye. He credits his like singing style of rapping to Fonte from Little Brother. And obviously his punchline style of rapping earlier in his career especially is cut right from the Lil Wayne cloth, which makes sense because he was signed to him. But there is nobody in the room who will deny that Kanye inspired Drake. The Weeknd is an interesting case. There are some people who would say that The Weeknd is inspired by Drake, which I guess means you could draw a direct line from Kanye to Drake to The Weeknd. But there are others who would suggest that it might have been the other way around, and Drake was inspired by The Weeknd. Abel revealed that 3 songs that were originally meant for his debut mixtape House of Balloons ended up on Drake's Take Care album. True Love, Shot For Me, and The Ride. On top of that, Abel also has a writing credit on Practice. With his fingerprints on almost like 25% of the album, I think it's clear that the influence was going more in one direction than the other. Now that doesn't make it a parasitic relationship, and it doesn't mean that Drake wasn't providing ideas or guidance to The Weeknd. At the end of the day, without being in the studio, none of us will ever really know what it was like to be Drake and The Weeknd in 2011. I think the idea that an artist just walks in and like siphons the swag out of another artist is like a little bit of just kind of like internet fan fiction. As someone who spent a lot of time in the studio with other people, like you guys just kind of bounce off of each other as long as there's no like weird power dynamic there. I understand it's a fun narrative, but in reality, like the two of them were probably sharing ideas in a more symbiotic way. And Drake also definitely helped platform The Weeknd. Most people first found out about The Weeknd from a blog post in 2010 that was an OVO blog post. He jumped on The Zone that was on the Thursday mixtape, and he put Abel all over what a lot of people consider to be his best album. I'm not here to have that Drake debate today. I'm not saying it's my favorite either. I might save that for another video. Well, the two of them have definitely had some tension in the past and seem to be constantly flirting with the idea of beefing with each other. Like, there's no doubt that there was at one point like a very healthy working relationship and a mutual respect between the two of these guys. So let's get back to the Kanye talk. I don't think there's a lot of like obvious DNA from Kanye's music in the early Weeknd work, at least in terms of sonics. Although I guess you can say that like some of the moody R&B stuff, like you could draw a line from 808s and Heartbreak into that, but I wouldn't say it's like as direct as listening to So Far Gone or some of the Drake R&B stuff. And their vocal capabilities are just like so different that it kind of changes what the music is going to sound like no matter what. But if you ask The Weeknd, he himself would tell you that Kanye is a huge influence. In a 2015 interview that he did with Pitchfork for his album Beauty Behind the Madness, Abel said that Kanye definitely helped craft who I've been subconsciously for the past few years. While the influence is not necessarily musical, Abel goes on to say that he was inspired by the way that Kanye constantly challenges and reinvents himself. He had to make the same decisions I did. College dropout, late registration, and then the shift into graduation, and another shift into 808s and Heartbreak, which got mixed reviews but is one of the most important bodies of work in my generation. So even if we don't hear the influence, if the man is telling us that he was influenced, then we gotta give this one as a point to Kanye. On the 2015 album that this interview cycle is from, Kanye appears on Tell Your Friends, which was actually originally a Kanye song before it got into The Weeknd's hands, according to internet lore. They've worked again a few times on a couple Kanye projects. The Weeknd is not as obvious of a successor as Drake is to Kanye, but I think it has to go into the yes bucket. When it comes to Travis Scott, it can be a little bit like the classic chicken or the egg story. Did Kanye find a kid who was clearly inspired by him and help platform him because he knew he had the resources that can help turn him into the star that he is today? Or did Travis introduce Kanye to some new sauce and help him keep his career going at a point where he was already almost a decade in? Let's look at the whole story and see what we can figure out. There is a little bit up in the air about how exactly Kanye and Travis were introduced to each other. According to DJ Premier, he knew Travis's family growing up, and Travis came to his house asking if he could sign him. But it wasn't really the sound that Premier was working on. But he thought, you know what? Maybe Kanye would be into this. So he called Kanye to co-sign him. The other story is that Travis reached out to an engineer named Anthony Kilhofer, who had worked with Kanye, and sent him a cold email, which led to some beats getting sent. And a few years later, Anthony gave him the call like, hey, I'm in New York with Kanye. He wants to work with you. Come through. And that's where you get the legendary Taco Bell story. Honestly, it's likely that both of these stories happened. And when Kanye realized there were two different people in his life who were vouching for Travis, it only pushed him to be like, hey, all right, let me check this kid out, you know? That's usually how it goes in music, I feel like. You might hear about an artist like 5-10 times before you actually click on him. It's kind of the same thing. So as the story goes, Kanye tapped Travis to help work on the Good Music compilation album, Cruel Summer. And he landed 3 placements on To The World, The Morning, and Sin City, and he also raps on Sin City as well. Travis went on to co-produce New Slaves and Guilt Trip on Yeezus. He clearly came in with the right stylistic choices for what Kanye had going on. He had the right production chops, and the general vibe to help Kanye push his music forward. But at the same time, on a higher level, there is no doubt who influenced who in this picture. He was the one inspired by Ye rather than the other way around. He was reaching out to engineers like Anthony Kilhofer, who he was finding in the credits of a Kanye West album. Only a real Kanye stan would be doing something like that. That doesn't mean it's not a symbiotic relationship, but Travis definitely grew up idolizing Kanye. And listening to Utopia, the Kanye influence is everywhere. It's obvious. From production on songs like Modern Jam and Circus Maximus, to the bars like I got Ye over Biden. I mean, this goes as another point for Ye, without a doubt. Future and Young Thug is where we can see Ye's case for influence get a little bit more convoluted. We can start with Future, who has had a much longer career in music than a lot of people realize. In the early 2000s, he was working with the legendary Atlanta collective Dungeon Family, which features people like Outkast. He got his first big songwriting credit in 2004 on Ludacris's song Blueberry Yum Yum. This is the same year that College Dropout came out, so Future was already making music in the industry before he was listening to solo Kanye West music, as far as any of us know. And it didn't really sound like anything that Kanye was on. However, that doesn't make Kanye immediately wrong here. When he mentions his influence on Future and Young Thug, he specified because of the Autotune album, or because of 808s and Heartbreak. When Future's solo career started to take off in the early 2010s, with songs like Turn on the Lights, he was definitely leaning on that Autotune stylistically. But the issue is, was Kanye really the first artist that people would think of or associate with Autotune? I would push back against that a little bit. The face of Autotune for most of the 2010s is T-Pain. People would call it the T-Pain effect for a reason. He was everywhere. You can argue that T-Pain is a singer, not a rapper, and that's true, but he does rap on a couple songs, but sure, let's go with that. But T-Pain was, of course, not the only artist using Autotune as an effect and a style choice. Arguably the biggest and best rapper alive at that point, Lil Wayne, was also experimenting with the plugin. His 2008 hit Lollipop had auto-tuned out backing vocals throughout the whole thing. Autotune would go on to become a way bigger part of his sound in the future as well, especially on Rebirth, which was his next album after the Carter 3, believe it or not, and on the Young Money compilation album We Are Young Money. The reason I bring Wayne up is because the first time I can remember hearing Kanye West use Autotune is on the Lollipop remix. The second time I can remember hearing him use Autotune is on Jeezy's song Put On, which is around the same time. And so those two songs came out the same year as 808s and Heartbreak, but in the first half of the year. And 808s was a fall and winter album. I'm not here to argue that Kanye West was inspired by Lil Wayne to use Autotune. I think the two of them were inspired by T-Pain. If we're being real here, Kanye and T-Pain have some tension. T-Pain has accused Kanye of bullying him in the studio, and also of stealing some of his bars for the song Dark Fantasy. So perhaps that's why Kanye isn't jumping to give T-Pain credit. And honestly, like him saying because of the Autotune album could even be a little bit of a sub at T-Pain. Wouldn't surprise me. However, back in 2008, when everybody was friends, T-Pain dropped the song Karaoke, talking about people trying to sound like him. And he said word for word, almost word for word, "It ain't all bad, some of it please me, but the only people that's cool are Kanye and Lil Weezy." So at that time, all three of these artists had a mutual respect for each other, and their use of the Autotune plugin.
Oh, T-Pain! Oh,
Hey, what's up?
dude, man, I didn't even recognize you without the auto-tune.
That's crazy. I didn't really recognize you without the auto-tune there.
Later on the same album, T-Pain and Lil Wayne had the classic Can't Believe It. Take you to the log cabin, where in Aspen. I feel like that song was a turning point for a lot of people with Autotune. Maybe we were hating on it before. That song is just undeniable, bro. It's just so great. Anyway, listening to Future, I think it's reasonable to draw a line between his earlier work and the auto-tuned efforts of Kanye and Wayne. The intersection of pop, R&B, and hip-hop, with the focus on effects and auto-tune, definitely includes both 808s and Heartbreak, and projects like Pluto and Honest, two of Future's earliest albums. Future and Kanye also worked together on the album Honest on the song I Won, and then later on in their careers as well. And Future and Wayne have plenty of work together, including Love Me, aka I'm on that good cushion alcohol. I always forget what that song is called because I just think of it as good cushion alcohol. I would say that Future is influenced by both of them, but I think Future might be the one influencing the two of them as well. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know. Kanye himself called Future the most influential artist of the 2010s in a Drink Champs interview in 2022. Now, Drink Champs makes a lot of people say some crazy stuff, but I don't think that's a crazy take at all. Listening to newer artists like Yeet, or even younger artists from the late 2010s like Playboi Carti or Lil Uzi Vert, It's hard not to hear the lineage from Future. Kanye was so inspired by Future that he went and signed Designer because he had a song that kind of sounded like Future. I went to a movie theater to see the Life of Pablo show, the Yeezy Season 3 thing, so I heard all those songs live with an audience around me for the first time, and everyone was like, yo, that's Future, when we heard Panda Part 2, or whatever that song is called. And with Wayne's beat selection and approach in the 2010s, it's pretty clear that he learned a few things from Future as well. I think everybody did. I mean, Future is so influential, like, people forget he was writing for Rihanna and Beyonce. You know, like, this dude was doing everything. I think the Future situation is a bit like that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles meme where they each helped each other walk at some point. But by the end, the roles are being a little bit reversed. But with that being said, I can see where Kanye is coming from. With Young Thug, I think the musical lineage is a lot more obvious with Wayne than Kanye. There's a YouTube video of him in 2011 talking about his future career where he says he's predicting he's gonna sign to Young Money and sign to Lil Wayne. In one of his earliest interviews after he started to blow up in 2014 with Complex, the interviewer asked if Wayne was one of his influences, and he flat out said, yeah, and went on to say, I want to get in the studio with Wayne more than anybody in the world. I'll get in the studio with Wayne before Michael Jackson right now. So I hope he's listening. The two ended up having a rather complex relationship, with a beef related to their label situation through Cash Money and both of them being signed to Birdman, from a healthy collaborative partnership to Birdman refusing to drop Lil Wayne's album The Carter 5, and then Young Thug saying, okay, I'm gonna drop The Carter 6, and then he had to change it to Barter 6 because Lil Wayne wouldn't let him drop The Carter 6. To Lil Wayne's tour bus getting shot up in Atlanta, which, like, I don't know anything about, but a lot of people say maybe, you know, whatever. But it doesn't really have to do with the influence factor because Young Thug is undeniably inspired by Lil Wayne. Now, with that being said, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Kanye also inspired Thug. Kanye was one of the first people to co-sign Thug's music, as he was seen in the club listening to the song Danny Glover, which they later had to rename Two Babies. In that same interview, he says word for word that he's a big fan of everything that guy being Kanye West, does because of who he is, and that they had already worked on some music, and when he had found out that Ye wanted to work with him, he was smiling ear to ear like a clown. I think that quote, that he was a fan of him because he is who he is really interesting. When it comes to understanding the influence of Kanye West, we need to consider that influence is more than just a sound, a way of rapping, or a production. Influence can also refer to how you go about carrying yourself. And when it comes to Kanye West, that's the guy who showed artists how to be an artist, especially in that run from 2004 to 2017. Kanye is inspirational in many ways. One of the biggest ones being that he's not afraid to switch things up. We can see 808s and Heartbreak as influential musically in terms of its use of autotune, but what I think is the most inspirational about 808s to a lot of artists is the fact that an artist who was at their commercial peak at the time, like Graduation is like stadium music, you know what I mean, decided to completely switch it up and take a huge risk on the next project. 50 Cent was making fun of what that Love Lockdown song sounded like the first time he heard it, because people thought Kanye was out of his mind. But he was right. Drake was clearly inspired by 808s when he dropped Honestly Nevermind, his dance album. Future was definitely inspired by 808s when he made Hendrix. Young Thug was inspired when he made Beautiful Thugger Girls. We could go on and on. Kanye is a risk taker, and to be honest, 808s isn't even the only risk that he took in his career. Yeezus is a risk. It might have been just as risky. And to me, it paid off in dividends. Although I remember listening to that album with my friends and they were like, what the fuck is this? I thought that shit was fire from day one. I have people who can vouch for me on that. But anyway, Ye and Jesus is King are both risky too. They just didn't hit as hard. For me, at least. Don't kill me. It's just an opinion, right? If we're going to talk about direct musical influence, then I think that Ye also left a few artists out that maybe would go first. This tweet by Al Shipley encapsulates that. Almost every rapper of the last 15 years is inspired by Kanye and or Lil Wayne. But it's funny that Kanye mostly wants to take credit for Wayne/Gucci inspired guys. I guess it's not as much of a flex to say Childish Gambino and JPEG Mafia wouldn't exist without you. I think he's right, although I'm not going to put as much spice into it as he did. Childish Gambino's early raps were two things. Definitely Kanye inspired and definitely pretty cringe. But from his royalty mixtape onward, I'm a fan of his music. I think he makes anywhere from good to really great music in that span. I love Childish Gambino. I would be proud to say that I inspired him if I inspired him, but whatever. I'm not as tapped in with JPEG Mafia, but I do like the stuff that I've heard. And after working on Vultures, he was very clear that he sees Kanye as an idol. I don't think there's any surprise to that. There are some other artists in here that fit as well. J. Cole, definitely inspired by Kanye. That goes without saying. He rapped on multiple Kanye beats during his mixtape era, and even though his song False Prophets talks more about Kanye's downfall than his successes, he says in the song that Kanye was his hero. Logic is inspired by Kanye too. For a more recent artist, Baby Keem is vocal about his love for Kanye, and He definitely approaches his music similar as a rapper-producer. Like these artists or not, they are some of the most popular rappers from the last 10 years or so. And that goes to back up the quote that Kanye gave us in the beginning of the video. Kanye is so influential that it's not particularly easy to find artists who were not influenced by him in some way, shape, or form, especially anyone who's hip-hop adjacent. But with that being said, that doesn't mean every artist was inspired by Kanye, and that also doesn't mean that he hasn't found himself on the other side, being inspired by other artists. Kid Cudi was very quick to tweet out that screenshot of his Wikipedia page that says he was the inspiration for Kanye West's album 808s and Heartbreak. I think it's hard to deny that. He's on the song Welcome to Heartbreak, was signed to Good Music, and was doing the moody, ethereal hip-hop thing when Day and Night came out at least, and that was late 2007. That's like a full year before we got the 808s and Heartbreak album. Big Sean, another artist who was signed to Good Music in the same era, just dropped a song on Instagram where he hints at confirming a long propagated rumor that he helped on the album Graduation. Going back further, Kanye's adherence to his performance art like eras and rollouts feels like a callback to some artists like David Bowie, but adopted to the world of hip-hop and spun in a way that only Kanye could really spin it. And when we talk about influence and inspiration, it's important to note that every artist has been inspired by someone or something that came before them. It shouldn't be seen as an insult or belittling to Drake's art or The Weeknd's art to say that they were inspired by Kanye. In the same way that it shouldn't be seen as a shot at 808s and Heartbreak that Kid Cudi was the inspiration. Kanye is open about his love for collaboration and allowing the writing process to be people bouncing ideas off each other in the studio, which runs antithetical to the old school hip hop attitude of you've got to be the only one writing your own raps. But it can lead to some beautiful music, as we've seen. That's a part of the Kanye West experience, and I don't think it should ever be seen as a diss to say someone is inspired by another artist, as long as they're not like full on biting and they're still injecting a bit of themselves into the whole thing. Of course, Kanye's quote didn't go over completely without a hitch. Boosie came out to say that he was not inspired by Kanye during his early run, with hits like Wipe Me Down. You can't relate to nothing I rap about. Nobody listens to Kanye in the projects or the trenches. My people don't relate to you. A bit of a blanket statement on his end, but there is a larger argument here that perhaps Kanye's influence didn't extend as far south as that quote made it sound. Boosie is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Kanye went on to agree, but with a little shade, on his IG story. I just saw that Wipe Me Down was made in 2007. I take no responsibility for whatever that genre will be called. And Boosie went on to keep talking about it, but honestly it's a little bit off topic for the rest of this video. I don't typically agree with Boosie, but he's probably right here, in that his music and southern rap in the second half of the 2000s as a whole probably didn't have that much Kanye DNA in it. This wasn't some small regional genre either, like some of the biggest rap hits of the mid to late 2000s came from southern artists. Soulja Boy's run in 2007 and 2008 didn't have that much to do with Kanye, nor did most of the snap music, the ringtone rap, or any of that stuff. Kanye hopped on the remix of Rich Boys Throw Some D's, but at the end of the day, that was kind of a separate thing that was going on from what Kanye had going on. We would be here all day naming artists and genres and movements that Kanye doesn't have his fingerprints all over, or that he didn't necessarily invent. But the fact that he can make an argument for all the artists he named is pretty insane. On the cap scale, this is relatively low as far as some of the things that Kanye has been saying to us, for like the last decade. He can talk his shit on this one issue. So yeah, we gotta give him some credit where it's due.